Hey everyone, welcome to the premiere episode of Redefining Work. If you've been following the podcast for a while, you know that I announced at the end of last season that Redefining HR is becoming Redefining Work, and here we are. So we're going to be telling stories about the new world of work, and these will be through the lens of different people who are directly impacting and influencing the new world of work. People like my friend Marcus Buckingham, who we'll be chatting with today. Marcus is coming back. This is actually a second time on the overall podcast, and so I'm thrilled to have the premiere episode of Redefining Work start with Marcus, because there are a few people on this planet who've actually been influencing the world of work quite like Marcus. And so I'm really excited to spend some time with him. Marcus, for those of you that don't know, is a best-selling author. He is the head of research, people, and performance at the ADP Research Institute. He's been a leading voice in so many aspects of our work over the last decade plus. And so excited to kick off 2023 with you. So Marcus, welcome to the show. We're entering a new year. It's 2023. It's been a dynamic couple of years, to say the least. When you're, we're now in January, usually, December, January is kind of that reflective moment where you kind of think about where we've been and where we're going. When you think about the world of work in 2023, what comes to mind for you?
Well, gosh, first of all, Les, congratulations on your new series, your new show. It's a super important part of everyone's life, isn't it? Work. So to think, really deeply about what the role of work is in our lives in the face of so much change, I think it'll be a fascinating podcast, and I'm super happy to be on here on your first one. As ever, it's very difficult to predict, right, what's going to happen in the future because we don't have any data about the future.
Right.
And in my position as head of the ADP Research Institute and our focus on people and performance, we're all about data. We're all about gathering data about the world's workers. We do about 28 different countries 2 or 3 times a year, and 2,500 people in the working world here in the US every month on all aspects of resilience and engagement and stress and confidence, inclusion, all sorts of things. And we've got lots of data about today and the recent past. The question is, how do you then project that out into the future? I do see 2 very clear trends in the data that are at the very least interesting. And they are contradictory. So to be frank with you right now, as we sit here, I'm not exactly sure how they're going to play out, because clearly some of us have come out of the pandemic cynical about the world of work and thinking that, frankly, the world of work is not all there is, that there's more important things to do in my life. There's more important people in my life. Thank you very much. The work is not my family. Don't even dream of calling work my family. It's disrespectful. Right. People at work don't really care about me. And I don't really care about work. The pandemic has given me an opportunity to think about my priorities, and work's kind of transactional. Thank you very much. And you can see some companies, Lars, responding to that cynicism. You can see a lot more surveillance software. 30% of people had surveillance software on their phones and their computers before the pandemic. Now it's up for white-collar workers at 65% or higher. You can see movements like the 4-day work week coming out of the UK. Initially, I think out of Iceland and then the UK, basically saying, look, work is, and I'm not saying this explicitly, but work is bad. Work is an intrusion. And therefore, the less of it we have in our lives, the better. So if we could do 4 days, it's better than 5, and 3 days will probably be better than 4. You can see that there is that angle of sentiment, which says that work is not actually going to be, it's not going to be the central part of my life. You can also see, though, another very distinct angle, Lars, in the data, which says that there's a swath of people going, wait a minute, work is a place in which I'm spending 40 or 50, 60 hours a week. If it's going to be that sort of place, it had better be a place in which I get a chance to express the very best of me. And so I want to be seen as a whole human there. I don't even quite know what that means in terms of location, in terms of on-site versus off-site versus hybrid. I don't quite know what that means in terms of tech and where tools intersect with me in my work. But I want work to be a place in which I encounter myself. It's not the only place, but it should be a place in which I am treated as a whole human. And so we see the whole wellness movement, the whole well-being movement indeed in the world of HR, and I know your podcast is extending beyond the world of HR, but we can see the whole world of HR extending beyond the transaction into me as a whole human that seeks meaning in life, and work is one of those places in which I can get to experience the meaning of my life. So as we move into 2023, there are some very specific questions where we're asking ourselves about where should we work and how much money we should make, and should my salary be transparent, and should I ever go in the office? There are some practical kind of 2-foot level decisions like that. But you can also, I think, see this really interesting bifurcation in how people have come to see the role of work in their lives. And just as a final thought, I suppose my thought would be, in very tight labor markets, which is what we've got, regardless if there's a recession or not, we're still going to be hovering around 3.5%, 4% unemployment here in the US. In a world like that, it sure seems to me anyway that the companies that emotionally resonate with the second swath of people, the people that are looking for meaning and purpose and humanism at work, it sure seems to me that those will be the organizations that will deserve the best people of these very tight labor markets.
Yeah,
I think, but that's the future. So I don't know how it's going to play out.
Look, I'll never ask you a forward-looking question and request certainty, because that's, a luxury none of us have. But I think you're right. Like, I think it's interesting getting your sense of how the data applies to those two different cohorts of job seekers, employees. And I definitely agree that latter group, especially going after that latter, cohort, they're going to be the ones that are best positioned to really draw talent, because they will actually be showing talent how they care, how they're built to support them, how they're built to support them beyond just, yes, here are the tools you need to be successful in your role. But even thinking bigger than that. And it's interesting. I think, we closed last year with, looking at, in tech specifically, a company like Twitter and all the upheaval that they went through, and this notion of, getting a hardcore 2.0 model. And I'm like, yeah, you can do that. You're the CEO. You can do whatever you want. But like, if you expect to be able to draw the caliber of talent that you used to, good luck with that. Like, you're on the employer brand side, it's great because you're letting people opt in or out based on like the reality of what it's like to work there. But, don't expect a large, talent pool of seasoned, experienced talent if you're very public that is how you work and how you operate. And it was interesting seeing, I think soon after the announcement around hardcore, there was, some people in the VC community who kind of champion that. And they're like, yeah, getting back to basics, lean, we need yes, startups need to be leaner. And we've learned that based on the layoffs we saw last year. But this notion that you can just strip away any idea of employee support beyond, benefits and paycheck and have that be a winning talent strategy, I think they're in for rude awakening. And I'm curious from you mentioned, I know that you're very data driven and data led. You're also very connected to the kind of stories that the media is telling about the world of work and HR and employment. Are there any gaps there? Like, are you seeing things in the data that make you say, I wonder why we're not talking about this more, that maybe we should be kind of turning more of an editorial spotlight on in 2023?
Well, that's an interesting question. There are a couple of gaps, things that I would thought we would be talking about, what we aren't talking about. One of them would be, let's say, in response to Twitter and what Elon Musk is doing there. I mean, obviously Musk is a genius entrepreneur, but when it comes to that word you're talking about there, talent brand, when you've got a really, really tight labor market, almost across the board, companies are going to be talking about that an awful lot more. Why? One of the questions that we ask in all of our surveys is, would you advocate your company as a place to work to friends and family?
Yeah.
And what you see from that question is huge variation across companies, across industries. You see it within companies too. But whatever you think that question is measuring, talent brand isn't a bad word combination to describe. Are you going to charge around in your community and say, yeah, you know what, you should come work here? So that whole word, what are companies doing with talent brand? How are they being as intentional about talent brand as they have been about their own product or service marketing brand? That's a very interesting thing to kind of get into. So for example, are we just talking about ping pong tables? Or I noticed that one of the things that Musk did is he got rid of some of the Eames chairs in the employee break rooms, or he got rid of the food in the cafeteria that was super high priced. And is that part of your talent brand? Or like, what is the story of your talent brand? to your point, it's going to be very difficult for Twitter to attract really great talent now that their talent brand is basically incoherent. I think you have to say that right now. It's incoherent. So talent brand, I don't think the media has really grappled with that. Is that just money? Is it location? So is it that people really, really want to work from Costa Rica? And that's really what's, how much of that is talent brand? Is it benefits? Is it, we do know, by the way, it's far more connected, interestingly, at least in our data, your ability to advocate the company as a place to work to friends and family is much, much more closely linked to your view of the people policies and the HR function of the company than it is to your manager, funnily enough.
Ah, interesting.
You can say, I got a really good manager.
Yeah.
But actually the company, the way the company does recruiting, onboarding, performance management, training, development, benefits administration, whatever. No, I wouldn't advocate that. I mean, I love my manager.
Yeah.
But I was lucky. I was kind of lucky. So our data would say, oh, by the way, talent brand, very important. And it's tied to things that we haven't really peeled the onion on. So I think that's an interesting one that we haven't seen much discussion on. I think the other one is a broader one around attention. It always struck me as weird that during the pandemic, when we talked about the burnout that we saw in doctors and nurses and that we now see in some other professions like, say, education, we never talk about span of control. We never talk about the fact that the average span of control in a hospital is one nurse supervisor to 60 nurses, and how those 60 nurses must therefore, by definition, not be getting frequent individualized attention about themselves and their lives and how they're feeling and what they're doing. And so we can talk about wellness all we want as a trend in work. And yet the place that supposedly is most concerned with the wellness of, in this case, its patients, has created an attention deficit culture where these poor nurses, how can you be well? I mean, physically and psychologically well, when no one even notices when you're coming to work. And they can't, not because the nurse supervisor is a bad human, but because he or she can't touch base or talk with or check in with 60 nurses. Like, you can't do that.
Right. Structural. So, right.
It's structural. Yeah. So if we think about, like, what should people be writing about? No question, talent brand's an interesting one, but just the whole idea of, it's not span of control, it's span of attention. What have companies done intelligently to respond to the deeply human need of, could someone please flip and pay attention to me in a world that's increasingly atomized? Yeah. Could you do that? And we don't talk about things like that very much. And I think that's a big miss.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I think that, as you mentioned, also kind of coming off the pandemic, right? I think we in HR have been trying to equip our managers to have different kinds of conversations with their employees, right? And I think it wasn't that long ago where, we had this notion of there's work and there's life and there's a firewall in between. And, when supervisors should talk about work stuff, and, now that's not the case. That's not the prevailing wisdom anymore. It's like, we need to treat our employees as humans. We need to have human conversations. We need to know how they're doing. We need to be able to check in. Like, there is nobody who can leave every aspect of their identity outside of their core working hours, right? That's just not realistic and possible or even fair to ask. So I'm glad you hit that point. And one question I'm curious about is, when you talk about especially looking at the data that you have, assessing organizational health, and you mentioned, kind of an NPS type score of whether they would recommend the company as an employer to their friends and family. Is that the best question to kind of gauge organizational health? Are there others? Like, I'm curious, like, how should businesses be thinking about how they can, what questions they can ask to really understand how they're doing in their employees' eyes?
Well, yes, there's a number of different angles we can take. I mean, one of the things that we've been working on at the ADP Research Institute is building thermometers. Yeah, that's the way I like to think about them. What is a reliable way to measure engagement? What is a reliable way to measure resilience, which is different than engagement? Resilience is a reactive frame of mind that enables you to bounce back and deliver of your best. Engagement is a proactive frame of mind. Also, though, inclusion. So we can measure the D, we can measure the E, we can actually count the D and the E of D, E, and I. But what about the I? Are we getting any better at the I? Neela Richardson, my co-head, who's a macroeconomist, she's an African-American woman, and she asked me about 2.5 years ago whether or not we were getting better at the I. And is it better to be better at the D and the E and the I doesn't matter, or is it the other way around, where so long as people feel included, it sort of doesn't matter how much you count the D and the E? And I rather shamefacedly had to say, I don't know, because there is no reliable way over the last, since 1964, Civil Rights Act, we actually haven't been measuring the I, people's sentiment about the I, in a reliable way. But I would suggest what companies should be looking at is engagement, proactive frame of mind. And there's a few questions. We've got a thermometer that we have great confidence in our items, but there are other items as well that other folks could use. Resilience, which is a measure of, as I said, a reactive frame of mind that enables you to deal with the challenges of life. That's interesting because they're related, but they're not duplicative.
Yeah.
So your level of resilience, you could be a highly resilient organization, but not very engaged. There are some countries like that. Israel, super engaged, not very resilient. China, super resilient, not very engaged. So it's interesting in terms of those two, proactive frame of mind, reactive. I would measure inclusion. We can't do DE&I seriously. We can't even evaluate whether the policies and practices we're trying out are working if we don't actually measure inclusiveness from a sentiment standpoint. We should do that. We should report that at board level. Frankly, it's part of ESG. So it's part of sustainability. So that unquestionably, we're going to see more and more reliable measures of key sentiments, one of them being inclusion. Just as a teaser, next year, we've taken all the data that we've got and we've decided that we should have a worker confidence index that we, the Research Institute, will just put it out every month in combination with the consumer confidence index. Why don't we have a worker confidence index?
Yeah.
That would be an interesting thing for companies to think about, just confidence, which more to come on that, Lars. Perhaps I'll come back on later and we can sort of dive into that. But those are a few of the things that companies should be looking at rigorously and frequently.
Yeah, no, I think I'd love to have you back when that comes out, because you're right. I think a lot of the statistics we see around the workforce are like, BLS statistics, right? Unemployment statistics, labor market types, but not necessarily from the employee perspective or sentiments. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
And, one of the trends I think we're starting to, not that we're starting to see, it's been around for a while. I think it's starting to gain momentum, is kind of the shift in our thinking from kind of role-based hiring and development to skills-based hiring and development. And, you can have some conversations at larger Fortune 500 type companies who do have the systems and the tools and the technology and the process to really have more of an internal skills-based market where that helps support development, growth opportunities, stretch opportunities. It impacts how they hire in different ways. But I don't think we're seeing that at the scale. I think the buzz of us talking about it is larger than what we're seeing in practice today, at least. And I'd love to get your perspective on kind of where we sit at a macro level on this shift towards like skills-based hiring and development.
Yeah, well, one of the things that every company is saying is that we don't have a labor shortage, we have a skills shortage.
Yeah.
And so every company, as you said, it's like the word of the day, isn't it? A skills graph. We need a skills graph inside our company. And where that leads, though, Lars, is we have to have a really interesting conversation about data.
Yeah.
And as it relates to skills, for example, some skills are very easily counted. Things like Python. Can you code in Python? Did you pass your Series 7 and your Series 63 exam? And if you happen to work in the financial sector, there are some very countable, did you pass the test or not? And if you didn't pass it, you can study again and take it again, and then you can pass it again, and then you've got that particular qualification. Skills graphs that are like that are great, actually, because the data at the heart of them, do you have that skill or not, is unimpeachable, it's reliable. Yeah. What's really interesting, though, is some of the ways that we use the word skill are relevant actually to or refer to behavioral combinations, like strategic thinking, like empathy, like executive presence, like, we're going to move into more of a consultative sale. Do we have enough people who are skilled in consultative selling? Okay, what's consultative selling? How do we measure that? In the same way as we could measure, did you pass your Series 7 or your Series 63? Because if we can't measure that, then we can't really have an intelligent conversation about whether or not we're having more of it or less of it, whether we're getting more or less of it. And at the moment, frankly, we haven't had an intelligent conversation about what is measurable about skills. And until we do that, until the whole of the working world gets more data fluent about what can we reliably measure about another human, particularly when it comes to these, I'll call them softer skills, but they're not actually soft skills. They're, really important sort of sets of skills. Until we can have a proper conversation about, well, how much of those can we reliably measure? How would we measure them when human beings can't rate other human beings on, like, there's absolutely no way that that I, for example, could rate you on strategic thinking. I can't do that.
Yeah.
We know that from 40 years of research that, and it's not unconscious bias. It's not because you're a white male and I don't like white males or whatever. It's because I can't see you. I can't hold a very complex skill like strategic thinking in my head as a construct, put all my subjectivity aside and become a source of objectivity in rating you. Well, if I can't do that, then all the skills graphs in the world, I don't care how much you aggregate the data source itself, me telling you or someone that you've got strategic thinking, that data source is invalid. It's garbage in. So we're right at that point, I think, and I'm not sure if this is exactly the question you're asking me, Lars, but we're exactly at the point where skills is really important, no question. But until all of us can grapple with, wait, what can another human rate another human on? When we know the answer to those questions, and that's knowable.
Yeah.
Maybe now isn't the time to get into what that is, but that's knowable. Once we know what we can reliably rate another human on, then we can start thinking about aggregating the data. And then we can start thinking about measuring what skills does the company have or not have. But until we actually get honest about what humans can rate other humans on, all of this, as you just said, it's all just kind of talk, but it's not real. And if we're not careful, we'll actually start making decisions about what skills we do or don't have as an organization based upon data that's faulty. A bit like if you look at LinkedIn, an awful lot of the data on what skills people have in LinkedIn is data coming from your maid and aunt who's rating you on empathy or something, or even a colleague who simply doesn't have enough interactions with you to know one way or another what you have or what you don't have. And in which case, we just, in the end, we don't trust the data.
Yeah.
So we're right there where it's like, we can gather data, but we actually haven't figured out how can we reliably measure something in somebody else.
I'm so glad you framed it that way, because it's such a good point. I think that there are some things, like you said, the choices are binary, right? Do you have this certificate? Yes or no? Like, can you code X with this software? Yes or no? But so much of what will be essential to this being successful is the ability to have consistently applied and understood ratings in all of these other areas that are much less binary, much more subjective. And I think when you look at companies that are using this now, a lot of those ratings are coming from either self-assessment, which we know the shortcomings there, or a manager's assessment, perhaps, which also has its own shortcomings, both from a subjectivity standpoint, but also like my standards. Even if you give us a rubric, the way that I apply that rubric is going to be different than the way you apply that rubric based on your own preferences, biases, all of these things that you bring to your perspective. So yeah, I'm interested to see, like, can we get there? Not can we get there, we can get there, but what will it take to get there in your mind?
Well, we know actually what humans can reliably report on.
Yeah.
Humans can reliably report on two things. My own feelings. I can tell you if I like that restaurant or if I didn't. I can tell you if I like that cheeseburger or didn't. I can tell you if I liked the movie or I didn't. If I say I didn't like the movie, Lars, you can't come in and go, yes, you did. I can go, I didn't. Now, that's subjective, but it's a reliable number. I could give it a scale of Rotten Tomatoes score of 92 or whatever. Somebody could come in and say, well, I don't agree with that. I think it was actually 107, and that's fine. What we've done is we've captured my subjectivity. So human beings can report on their own feelings, and we can report on our own intended actions. So Marcus, would you go and see the movie again? Yes, I would. No one can come in and go, no, that's wrong, Marcus. Because I'll go, no, I said I would. So if we're really humble, and I know it's a weird word to say, the strange word to apply to data, we need to be humble about what human beings can reliably report on other human beings. We can report only on our own feelings and our own intended actions. Now, what that means, though, is we can start inferring skills. So I can't rate you, Lars, on salesmanship. I can't do that. But if you ask me, Are you going to hire Lars again for that contracting sales job? Would you hire him again? Would you, or maybe we actually see that you keep hiring him as a contingent worker for that sales role when we can see that behavior of mine. Now it's subjective. I'm not objectively rating Lars on salesmanship. I just keep hiring him for sales, or I keep hiring him to do PowerPoint presentations, or I keep hiring to whatever. We have a tool set inside ADP called Work Market, where you can start to see these contingent workers being repeatedly hired for certain things that presumably somebody wants them to do. Well, if somebody is repeatedly asking you to do a particular thing, that's not a bad piece of data. It's not us rating you, Lars, on salesmanship, but I keep hiring you for it. Okay, that's good data because it means that somebody close to the action, namely me close to you, is choosing to keep voting, if you like, for you for that particular skill. Just like if I wanted to measure my assessment of you, I wouldn't be asking me to rate you. I would say, tell me what things do you always turn to Lars for? Just give me 3 things you always turn to him for. Now, again, I'm not objective about that, but there's no objective source. There's a myth of objectivity. What we don't want objectivity from Marcus. We want a reliable way to access Marcus's subjectivity. And now if we do that at scale, if we flip everything around, stop having humans rate other humans and just capture how someone feels and what they intend to do, oh, well, now we've got humbler, but more reliable data sources from people really close to the action, which in this case is you. Now we do that right, and now we've got a skills graph worth talking about.
You know, I love that framing. And I know everybody out there is always chasing measurements for quality of hire. At its simplest form, would you hire this person again?
Exactly.
No, yes or no,
exactly.
Right? That's easy. You could all do that tomorrow. So
when my first 15 or so years, all I did, I built pre-employment selection instruments. I built psychometrically sound pre-employment selection instruments. And what you do when you do that, you have to first do a concurrent validity study. So you go to a company like, say, Federal Express, and you'll go, give us your 100 best salespeople and your 100 average. And they'll say, okay, we got data on that, but what are you really asking? And we would have to say, well, to build your study group of 100, just give us the people you would hire more like, the people you would hire again.
Yeah.
And it's funny, people think, well, that's bad research. No, that is the folk definition of a study group, is somebody that you would choose to hire again. And that's not, you're not claiming that it's the perfect study group of 100. You're saying, though, are there a group of people that you would really hire again? And are there a group of people that you're not sure? That is a great way to start, actually. Seems like it's too qualitative, but it isn't. It's actually just humbly saying, is there a group of people that you think you'd hire again? Okay, let's go talk to them.
I love that. And, you know, Marcus, every time we talk, I feel like we have an hour left on the table. So we'll definitely have to have you back for a 3rd episode, particularly when that does get released, because I'd love to go deeper. We close every episode with a quick lightning round, 1 sentence or so answers. And in the new season of Redefining Work, I'm tweaking those a little bit. So you will, again, be the inaugural answer of these questions. But the first one is, what brings you joy lately?
What brings me joy lately? What brings me joy lately is the possibilities in the world of work. I'm a nerd. I love, just like you, I love thinking about all this. Work's huge. I'm joyful with the fact that we can make a big difference post-pandemic. We really can. It's a great opportunity, and I'm really joyful about that.
That's great. And last question, what advice do you have for HR and people practitioners today?
2 things. 1, double down on humanism, double down on the human. Move above the transaction. We got to put the human back into human resources, big time. And second, get data fluent, get data fluent, get data fluent. You cannot be, as an HR practitioner, trusted if you don't know good data from bad. So important to have both those sides. Understand the human deeply and understand good data. Gosh, if we do that, we can really make a big difference.
All right, Marcus, amazing wisdom as always. Thanks again for making time to join the debut episode of Redefining Work. And I'll go back some of the links to the thermometer and the things that you referenced earlier. I'll see if we can actually get some links in the show notes. So for listeners and viewers who want to check that out, we'll make that easy for you.
Sure. The only thing I would say is I've got all of that stuff on adpri.org. So if you put the links on there, if you want to go diving into thermometers, please go there. And then Instagram is the place where I sort of put myself out there. It's the only social media place that I seem to know how to handle. So if anyone wants to follow along with anything going on, Instagram's probably the best place for me.
And the handle, Instagram handle. Now I have to fill that in.
Oh, MW Buckingham, I think.
Okay.
Middle name W. I'm not telling you what that is. That's a secret.
We'll save that for episode 3. Marcus, thanks so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Lars. Thank you.